My journey of learning English. Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and I am a student of English literature. Today, I want to share with you the story of my journey in learning English. This story begins in a city called Manchester, where I moved to improve my English skills. The train ride. It was a bright and sunny day in the middle of summer. The sun was shining, and I felt excited about my new life in Manchester. I was traveling on a train, looking out of the window at the beautiful countryside passing by. On the train, I noticed three women sitting across from me. They were talking and laughing together in English. I tried to understand what they were saying, but I could only catch a few words. At that time, I was just beginning to learn English, so my vocabulary was very limited. I felt a bit nervous, but I really wanted to practice speaking. After a few minutes of thinking, I decided to gather my courage and talk to them. I used some basic English words that I had learned in my classes. I introduced myself and asked where they were going. To my surprise, the women understood me. They smiled and responded kindly, which made me feel more confident. They told me that they were from a nearby town and were returning home after attending a conference in the city. Our conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and it was a significant moment for me. Before I got off the train at my stop, they kindly gave me their phone numbers and addresses, saying I could visit them anytime I wanted. This brief encounter motivated me even more to work on my English every day. I realized that even with my limited vocabulary, I could still communicate and be understood. From that day on, I made a promise to myself to practice English as much as possible. Daily practice. After the meeting on the train, I began to work hard on my English. I set aside time every day to study. I started translating simple texts from English to my native language and vice versa. I watched English movies with subtitles, trying to understand the dialogues and repeat the sentences. I also listened to English songs and tried to sing along, even if I didn't know all the words. Every new word I learned felt like a small victory. In just 6 months, my English improved significantly. I was able to understand more and speak more confidently. However, I knew there was still a lot to learn. I wanted to be able to speak fluently and understand English in any situation. So, I decided to take the next big step. One moved to Manchester to study English more intensively. Moving to Manchester. Moving to Manchester was a big change for me. It was the first time I lived in a different city, far from my family and friends. The city was full of life, with people from all over the world. I found a small apartment near the school where I would be studying. The neighborhood was friendly, with shops, cafes, and a beautiful park where I could relax and study. On my first day at school, I was both excited and nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but I was eager to learn. The school was in a large building with many classrooms. When I arrived, I met my teacher, a kind and patient young woman named Emily. She greeted each of us with a warm smile and made us feel welcome. There were students from many different countries in the class, all of us there to learn English. Emily's unique teaching method. Emily's teaching method was different from what I had experienced before. She explained that we wouldn't be focusing on textbooks or memorizing grammar rules. Instead, she encouraged us to use English as much as possible in our daily lives. She believed that the best way to learn a language was by practicing it in real-life situations, not just studying it from books. This approach was perfect for me because I always found traditional studying methods confusing. Emily emphasized that language is a tool for communication. She explained that while learning vocabulary and grammar is important, the key to mastering a language is using it to express our thoughts and ideas. During our lessons, we talked about various topics, such as our hobbies, our favorite foods, and what we enjoyed doing in our free time. We often worked in pairs, practicing conversations with each other and with Emily. The classes were enjoyable, and I felt that I was making real progress in speaking English. I was no longer just a student, I was becoming a communicator. One of the first things Emily taught us was how to introduce ourselves properly. This might seem simple, but it was an important first step in building confidence. We practiced saying our names, where we were from, and what we like to do. These introductions were the foundation of many future conversations. Emily also introduced us to some common phrases and expressions used in everyday English. These phrases helped us sound more natural when speaking. For example, instead of saying, "I am hungry," we learned to say, "I could eat," or "I'm starving." These little changes made a big difference in how we communicated. Learning new vocabulary. The following day, I returned to school, eager to learn more. One of the students, Maria from Spain, asked Emily a question that I found particularly interesting. What is the best way to learn new words? Emily explained that there are many ways to learn vocabulary, but the most effective method, according to research, is through reading. She told us that people who read regularly learn new words twice as fast as those who don't. Emily recommended reading for at least 30 minutes each day and choosing texts that we found interesting. She stressed the importance of enjoying what you read. Whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or even articles, the content should be engaging. If we came across a word we didn't understand, Emily advised us to look it up in a dictionary. This way, we could fully comprehend the text and retain the new words in our memory without needing to write them down. Over time, these words would naturally become part of our vocabulary. Emily also mentioned another benefit of reading. It helps us see how words are connected in sentences, which improves our understanding of grammar. By observing how words link together, we could learn how to use them correctly in our own sentences. After the lesson, we discussed the job market in Manchester and what kinds of jobs were suitable for students. This was particularly important to me because I wanted to find a part-time job while studying. Some students suggested that I visit a job center, as they often had positions available for students. Later that day, I went to the job center, unsure of what type of job I could do. I spoke with a friendly lady who worked there, and she suggested a few options, including working as a waitress in a cafe. Although I had no prior experience, She assured me that my English was good enough for the job and that I would have plenty of opportunities to practice speaking with customers. I decided to take the job and was scheduled to start on Thursday. I was excited about the opportunity to practice my English in a real-world setting and was eager to see how much I could improve. My first day at work. On Thursday, I arrived at the Cove for my first day of work. The Cove was a cozy place, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods. My boss, Sarah, was a young woman with a friendly smile. She welcomed me warmly and showed me around the Cove. Sarah taught me how to make different types of coffee, how to serve customers, and how to handle payments. At first, everything seemed overwhelming, but Sarah was patient and encouraging. She told me not to worry about making mistakes and that I would learn quickly with practice. I spent the day learning and working alongside my new colleagues. They were all very supportive, helping me whenever I needed it. I had to interact with customers, taking their orders and serving them. This was a bit challenging at first, but I soon realized that it was the perfect way to practice my English. I had to listen carefully to what the customers were saying and respond appropriately. This real-life practice was invaluable. At the end of my first day, I was exhausted but also very happy. I felt proud of myself for taking on this challenge. I knew that working at the Cove would not only help me improve my English, but also give me a chance to meet new people and learn more about British culture. Pronunciation practice. On Friday, I went back to school, excited to share my experiences with Emily and my classmates. During the lesson, one of my classmates, John from South Korea, raised an interesting question about pronunciation. He admitted that he struggled with pronouncing certain English words and asked Emily for advice on how to improve. Emily introduced us to a technique called shadowing. She explained that shadowing is a simple but powerful method for improving pronunciation. The idea is to listen to native speakers and repeat exactly what they say, trying to match their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. Emily explained that when we speak a new language, we often use the same muscle movements that we use in our native language. This can lead to pronunciation differences that make us sound less natural in the new language. By shadowing, we can train our mouths to produce sounds in the way native speakers do. To demonstrate, Emily showed us a video on YouTube where the shadowing technique was being used. We watched as the person in the video listened to a native speaker and then repeated their words immediately after hearing them. After watching, we tried shadowing ourselves for a few minutes in class. Although it felt challenging at first, Emily encouraged us to practice regularly, especially when preparing for presentations or important conversations. This technique intrigued me, and I was eager to try it out more on my own. I realized that it could significantly improve my pronunciation, helping me to speak more clearly and confidently. After class, I decided to practice shadowing with some English songs I liked. I chose songs with clear lyrics and listened carefully, trying to imitate the singer's pronunciation and rhythm. It was fun, and I noticed that my pronunciation was slowly getting better. Weekend adventures. That weekend, I decided to explore more of Manchester. I wanted to practice my English in different settings and meet new people. On Saturday morning, I went to a local market. The market was bustling with activity vendors selling fresh fruits, vegetables, clothes, and handmade crafts. I walked around, listening to the conversations around me, and occasionally, I would stop at a stall to ask about the products. One vendor, an elderly man selling homemade jams, struck up a conversation with me. He asked where I was from and what brought me to Manchester. I told him about my studies and my efforts to improve my English. He was very kind and patient, speaking slowly and clearly so I could understand. We talked for a while about the different types of jams he made, and I even bought a jar of strawberry jam to take home. Later that day, I visited a small bookstore that I had passed by several times before. The store was quiet and cozy, with shelves full of books on every topic imaginable. I browsed through the English language section and found a book that looked interesting. The store owner, a middle-aged woman, noticed my interest and came over to help. She recommended a few books that were popular with English learners and suggested that I try reading short stories to start with. I took her advice and bought a collection of short stories. That evening, I sat down with a cup of tea and started reading. The stories were simple, but they were full of new words and expressions. I kept my dictionary close by and looked up any words I didn't understand. By the end of the evening, I had learned several new words and felt a sense of accomplishment. Learning grammar through context. The following week, during one of our lessons, we focused on grammar. One of the students, Ahmed from Egypt, asked Emily, "What should I do if I'm not sure whether my sentences are grammatically correct?" Emily smiled and said, "There are two types of students, those who want to speak English fluently and those who need to pass exams. If your goal is to speak fluently, you don't need to study grammar intensively. When you learned your native language, you didn't start with grammar rules. You learn it through context. You can do the same with English." She continued, explaining that reading is one of the best ways to learn grammar naturally. Books, especially well-written ones, provide examples of correct grammar in context. By reading regularly, we could absorb grammar rules without consciously studying them. For those who needed to study grammar for exams, Emily recommended visiting a website that categorized grammar rules by levels of difficulty. She advised these students to practice with past exam papers to familiarize themselves with the exam format and to study only the grammar that was necessary for their level. As for me, I was more interested in speaking English fluently than in passing exams. I felt relieved to know that I could focus on reading and practicing rather than memorizing complex grammar rules. Later that day, I visited the website Emily mentioned and found it very helpful. I started using it to check the grammar rules that were most relevant to my level of English. In the afternoon, I went to work at the COF. It was my second day on the job, and I was already feeling more confident. My boss, Sarah, was supportive, and I was beginning to handle many tasks on my own. I was also getting plenty of opportunities to speak English with customers, which was exactly what I had hoped for. One evening, while working at the COF, I had an interesting conversation with a customer named Jack. He was a regular at the cafe and often stopped by for a cup of coffee after work. Jack was a teacher at a local school, and when he learned that I was studying English, he offered to help me practice. We talked about different topics, from the weather to sports, and he corrected my mistakes gently, helping me understand how to use certain phrases correctly. This conversation was very helpful for me. It showed me that people were willing to help if I just asked. I started looking forward to my shifts at the cafe, not only because I was earning money, but also because each shift was an opportunity to practice and improve my English. Testing my English skills. The following Monday, I returned to school, eager to share my weekend experiences with the class. During our usual class discussion, I talked about my work at the cafe and how I was getting better at speaking to customers. One of the girls in the class, Laura from Italy, noticed something different about my voice and said, "Your pronunciation sounds much better than last week." I smiled and explained that I had been practicing shadowing over the weekend. I had spent hours listening to native speakers and trying to imitate their pronunciation. Although I knew I wasn't perfect, I was proud of the progress I had made in such a short time. Emily asked the rest of the class if anyone else had tried shadowing. A few students said they had, including John from South Korea. He mentioned that he found the technique helpful, although he struggled with repeating some of the faster sentences. Emily thanked everyone for trying and gave us some additional tips. She explained that it's normal for our mouths to feel tired after shadowing for the first time, just like how our muscles ache after a workout. She encouraged us to take breaks if needed, but to keep practicing regularly to improve our pronunciation. At the end of the lesson, I had a question for Emily. I told her that I had visited the grammar website she mentioned, but wasn't sure which level I should focus on because I didn't know how many English words I knew. Emily suggested that I take an online vocabulary test that estimates the number of words a person knows in a foreign language. I was curious to see how many words I knew, so I took the test immediately. I discovered that I knew around 2,100 words in English. Most of my classmates were in a similar range, with a few students knowing slightly more or less. Emily explained that with this knowledge, I could tailor my grammar studies to my level and focus on the rules that would be most beneficial for me. She encouraged us all to take the test every month to track our progress and adjust our learning strategies accordingly. I decided to take the test every month to see how much progress I was making. It became a regular part of my learning routine, and I enjoyed seeing my vocabulary grow over time. Handling mistakes, a natural part of learning. On Tuesday, we had another interesting discussion in class. One of the students, Elena from Russia, asked Emily, "I want to practice speaking with people around me, but I'm afraid of making mistakes. I don't want to look silly. What should I do?" Emily responded with empathy, "Making mistakes is a normal part of learning any new skill, including a language. When I learned my native language, I made lots of mistakes, but that didn't stop me from speaking. The same goes for English." She shared her own experience of learning Spanish, explaining that she didn't worry about making mistakes because her main goal was to communicate her ideas. Emily emphasized that perfection isn't the goal when learning a language. Communication is. To help us feel more comfortable, she suggested focusing on the message we wanted to convey, rather than worrying about making mistakes. She also reassured us that as we continue to practice and use English, our mistakes would naturally decrease over time. Emily compared learning a language to learning a musical instrument. When you first start playing, you make mistakes, but with practice, you improve. The same applies to language learning. The more we read, speak, and practice, the fewer mistakes we'll make. She encouraged us to read aloud to improve our fluency and reduce mistakes during real conversations. She also reminded us that even native speakers make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. The important thing is to keep practicing and not let the fear of making mistakes hold us back. After class, I felt more confident about speaking English, even if I wasn't perfect. I knew that mistakes were just part of the learning process, and I was ready to continue practicing without fear. Making new friends through sports. Later that week, I decided to join a sports team at school. I had always loved playing football, so when I heard that there was a football team at the school, I immediately signed up. The first training session was on Thursday evening. When I arrived at the training field, I was excited to see students from many different countries. There were players from Brazil, Japan, Spain, Russia, and Italy, just to name a few. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and although we all spoke different languages, English was our common ground. During the training session, we practiced different drills and played a few friendly matches. It was a great way to relax after a day of studying, and I also had the chance to practice my English with my teammates. We talked about football, our favorite teams, and our experiences in Manchester. It was a lot of fun, and I quickly made new friends. After the training, some of the players invited me to join them for a drink at a local pub. I was a bit nervous because I wasn't sure if I would understand everything they said, but I decided to go anyway. At the pub, we continued our conversation, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that I could follow most of the discussion. When I didn't understand something, my new friends were patient and explained it to me. Joining the football team was one of the best decisions I made during my time in Manchester. It gave me the opportunity to meet new people, practice my English in a relaxed setting, and stay active. Learning English through conversations. One day, after a football training session, I had an interesting conversation with one of my teammates, Marco from Italy. Marco had been in Manchester for almost a year, and his English was very good. I asked him how he had learned English so well. Marco told me that when he first arrived in Manchester, he could barely speak English. But instead of focusing only on studying, he made an effort to speak English as much as possible in his daily life. He talked to people in shops, on the street, and at his workplace. He didn't worry about making mistakes, he just kept practicing. He also told me about a technique called thinking aloud. Marco explained that he would often think in English instead of his native language. Whenever he was alone, He would speak his thoughts out loud in English. This helped him practice forming sentences and expressing his ideas more clearly. I found Marco's approach inspiring. I decided to try thinking aloud myself. At first, it felt strange to speak to myself, but I quickly realized that it was a great way to practice English. I started thinking in English whenever I was walking alone, cooking, or doing other activities by myself. It became a habit, and I noticed that my ability to express myself in English improved over time. My first presentation in English. A few weeks later, Emily announced that we would each give a short presentation in class. The topic could be anything we wanted, but it had to be in English, of course. I was nervous about speaking in front of the class, but I knew it was a good opportunity to practice. I decided to talk about my hometown, a small city in southern Brazil. I prepared my presentation by writing down key points and practicing in front of the mirror. I also used the shadowing technique to improve my pronunciation. On the day of the presentation, I was a bit anxious, but I reminded myself that everyone in the class was there to learn, just like me. When it was my turn, I stood up and started speaking. I talked about the beautiful beaches, the vibrant culture, and the delicious food in my hometown. Although I made a few mistakes, I was able to get my message across, and my classmates seemed interested in what I had to say. After the presentation, Emily gave me some constructive feedback. She pointed out a few areas where I could improve, but also praised me for my effort and clarity. I felt relieved and proud of myself for taking on the challenge. Conclusion: my advice for learning English. As my time in Manchester continued, I became more comfortable using English in my daily life. I followed Emily's advice and dedicated time each day to reading, listening, and speaking English. I practiced shadowing regularly, which greatly improved my pronunciation, and I used the vocabulary test to track my progress. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson I learned was not to be afraid of making mistakes. Instead, I embraced every opportunity to practice and improve. My experience in Manchester taught me that learning a language is a journey, not a destination, and I'm excited to continue improving my English every day. If you're learning English, my advice is simple: read, listen, think, and speak in English every day. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are just stepping stones on your path to fluency. And most importantly, enjoy the process. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the faster you'll see progress.